into Delaware evolving legal landscape have made her a sought-after speaker and thought leader in the field. I'm not going to read all of this because you want to hear Kathy more than me. Kathy will explore the history and significance of Delaware's corporate franchise, its rise as a corporate capital to the world, and the recent passage of SB 21. So let's give a round of applause for Kathy.
Good afternoon, and thank you, John, for the kind introduction, and to all of you for welcoming me here today to speak about Delaware's corporate franchise and recent challenges that you may have heard about in the news to Delaware's dominance in this area. As many of you know, and not to delve too deeply into the history of this, Delaware emerged, despite its small size, as the preeminent jurisdiction in which corporations incorporate. They choose Delaware as their corporate home, and that started about 100 years ago. Before about 1899, as many of you may not know, every corporation had to be formed by an act of the legislature. And that changed in Delaware in 1989 when Delaware adopted its first general corporation law, a set of rules, flexible rules, that allowed corporations to be formed privately through filing a certificate of incorporation with now our Secretary of State's office. That flexible approach, and in particular the choices made by those who created the DGCL, allowed Delaware to supplant New Jersey, which prior to about this time was the leading venue for corporations in the United States. That emergence of Delaware as the leading domicile is the word we use, a domicile for corporations, is not just an act of history. It's not like finding oil underneath our land. It was a result of careful tending by generations of our corporate leaders and our government officials. And that legacy is really important to Delaware. It has paid substantial dividends to all of us as Delawareans. Delaware is the corporate home of over 50% of all publicly traded companies, 66% of the Fortune 500, and innumerable other private corporations. We also created alternative types of business entities, LLCs and LPs, which have all flocked to Delaware as well. That corporate franchise, the taxes that these organizations pay to be chartered under Delaware law, generates nearly $3 billion, approximately 2/5 of the state's entire budget in tax and related revenues. This is the industry that allows Delaware to be the home of tax-free shopping, which I very much appreciate personally, but it also supports a wide range of public programs benefiting all Delawareans. It supports our local schools, it supports infrastructure, it supports community organizations, and it brings high-paying jobs and well-educated workforce to Delaware, and it keeps them here. Now, I'm not going to go into the history of it any more than that because I know people in this organization are probably at least somewhat aware of the importance of the corporate franchise to Delaware. But I do want to talk about the fact that recent events have shown that we really can't take Delaware's prominence for granted. In recent years, and particularly over the past 2, there has been a growing chorus of people who question whether it's right or fair that Delaware, a very small state, is dominant in this area. There have been, for a long time, calls to federalize corporate law, and there have been efforts at various times from other states to attract corporations to change their corporate home, to leave Delaware and become a Texas or a Nevada corporation, for example. These threats are real, and while I personally believe that Delaware can overcome them, we really can do so only if all Delawareans come together, as we have in the past, to broadly support and protect this legacy, the corporate franchise. Our dominance, I like to say, is built on a very stable foundation that has 5 pillars. I recently saw a commentator who said there were 7 pillars. I combined them into 5. We can have a debate over how many there are, but I'm going to talk about the 5 pillars as I see them. The first is very unique to Delaware. In Delaware, our constitution, our state constitution, actually includes protections for the autonomy of Delaware corporations and Delaware corporate directors. Article 9 of our Constitution, it's unique among state constitutions. It requires a 2/3 majority to amend the Delaware General Corporation Law, and it prohibits the legislature from interfering with the operation of a particular corporation by changing their charter on a one-off basis. So although Delaware is a blue state, our legislature cannot, on a partisan basis, dictate that corporations make partisan business decisions that advance a liberal agenda or a conservative agenda. And that is very important to corporations, and is very important to investors. No other state offers those protections to their corporate citizens. As I've mentioned, our dominance came by virtue of us adopting a very flexible, enabling corporate law. It does not set hardline rules. It creates a range of opportunities for corporations to tailor the rules of their governance, as our organization, this organization tailors its rules of governance to fit their specific needs. And that's why it's been so long-lasting. The needs and expectations of business and of investors change over time, and the DGCL changes and allows individual corporations to change and innovate to meet the needs of a changing global economy. We regularly update the DGCL every year as problems arise to make sure that it continues to meet the needs of business. As many of you have heard, Delaware also has the best court system. We have a truly expert and efficient court system, characterized in the business arena by our Court of Chancery, but also our Complex Commercial Litigation Division, which is the Court of Chancery in particular is a specialized court with non-elected judges who have business savvy and are able to decide disputes particularly efficiently, quickly, which serves the needs of businesses. They've been doing that for over 100 years, and there is 100+ years of precedent that transaction planners and advisors like I and others in my firm rely on when we're advising our clients to make decisions. We also, unlike some states, have a direct right of appeal to our Supreme Court, which makes resolution of disputes that much more efficient. We also have a very well-informed and effective legislature that recognizes the importance of the corporate franchise to Delaware's fiscal well-being. That means our legislators are motivated and responsive to the needs of corporation, but it does not mean that they are beholden to them. Our legislature achieves a balance between the interests of corporate managers and corporate investors. And our legislature meets annually. I was really surprised when I learned that in Texas and Nevada, for example, their state legislatures only meet every other year, which means any need to update the law would have to wait up to 2 years to be accomplished. And then finally, we have a well-established and expert infrastructure that has grown over 100 years to serve the needs of corporations. The government agencies like the Secretary of State's office and the Division of Corporations are amazingly responsive and customer service oriented. Filings in our Secretary of State's office are often processed in hours, not days. And that is critically important to a corporation that needs to issue stock to raise funds for a business initiative or take other action for the benefit of their investors. And so I say all this because in recent decades, the Court of Chancery has often been touted and viewed as the centerpiece of the Delaware advantage. That is absolutely true. It is a huge part of the Delaware advantage. But in my view, the strength of all of those pillars are equally important to ensure that Delaware maintains its dominance. And I think the events of the last couple of years really shows that. Because as you probably all know, much of the recent controversy about Delaware's place in corporate America was triggered, to some extent, by certain high-profile and very vocal business leaders who took to social media to criticize the Court of Chancery and the overall litigation environment in Delaware. If we were reliant only on the power of our court to support the corporate franchise, that would have been a problem. But we don't. We have a large and broad-based support for the franchise in Delaware, and that is what has allowed us to overcome those challenges. Now, talking about those challenges, the concerns about the litigation environment in Delaware were not just sour grapes from one discontented litigant. The concerns about increasing unpredictability of decisions from our courts and inefficiency of litigation in Delaware were voiced broadly by many leading corporate practitioners, including the leading lawyers at some of the top law firms in the country who have always been Delaware's biggest fans and who play a critical role in helping corporations decide where they will be incorporated. And the discontent was fueled in part by the emergence of a new class of professional plaintiffs' law firms who, when changes in federal securities laws made it somewhat more difficult to bring claims based on federal law, turned their attention to Delaware. And as a result, litigation in Delaware, I've seen it, and I think others in the room have probably seen it, became more common and increasingly burdensome and inefficient to resolve. This was a concern for Delaware corporations because the costs of that litigation in terms of delay and actual monetary costs fall ultimately on the investors. And it was also an issue for Delaware, for the court system. We saw year after year the heavy workloads of our judges making the courts have to go back to the legislature and ask for more resources, more seats on the bench, and more support for those judges. And the combination of that heavy workload and the low salaries posed challenges for recruiting the best and the brightest to serve as the judges on our court. All of these concerns together, and they've been long-standing, served to undermine the confidence that Delaware's corporate citizens, that corporate America had in the stability and flexibility of Delaware, the general corporation law, and the previously unchallenged superiority of the Court of Chancery as the best forum for resolving corporate disputes. This isn't new. We've faced those concerns in the past, and historically, the 5 pillars that I talked about came together to, largely in the background, address corporate America's concerns while maintaining a balance between the interests of corporate managers and investors. That kind of changed in 2025 with some of the public calls to leave Delaware, which, when amplified on social media, brought what had previously been latent concerns that were of interest only to corporate practitioners to the front pages of the News Journal, the New York Times, and most importantly, on X. Whether one agrees with the position of those critics or not, the risk that Delaware could lose a substantial number of large public companies and the tax revenues they generate for the state was unquestionably a substantial and immediate threat to Delaware's dominance, and more importantly, to Delaware's fiscal health. It called for an urgent response, and as is typically the case, the Delaware infrastructure, those 5 pillars, came together to provide that response. That resulted, in the short term, with the introduction of SB 21. It was a bill introduced by a bipartisan group of legislators, including someone in the room today, with the support of the governor, the Secretary of State, leaders of the bar, and others. I don't want to take your time to explain all of the ins and outs of SB 21. I'm happy to stay and answer any questions after the fact. But suffice it to say that SB 21 sought to be, and I believe it was, a balanced approach, a balanced solution that addressed some, but not all, of the concerns that we were hearing from Delaware's corporate citizens. But it did so while maintaining a balance and not favoring one side's interests over the others. It addressed, in short, the expansion of a very burdensome type of litigation involving controlling shareholders by codifying a clearer safe harbor path to allow corporate practitioners to know what is required up front to avoid the risks of costly and disruptive litigation after the fact. And it addressed the emergence of a really burdensome set of rules under Section 220, which had allowed lawyers on the plaintiff's side to burden corporations with very burdensome, as I said, demands to review books and records of the corporation without even articulating a cause of action in a court of law. And it did that by codifying the common sense limits that had been imposed through case law in the past. So thankfully, we were able to get SB 21 passed, and it does appear to have restored the confidence of corporate America in the Delaware franchise, at least for now. But the process of getting there was uncharacteristically contentious, and that in and of itself revealed some concerns. It showed, for example, that we really can't take for granted the legislature's historic bipartisan support for issues of importance to corporate America. We've seen a generational and political shifts that brought new members to our General Assembly, and it brought a new generation of voters to the polls. And not all of those people fully understand the ins and outs of why the corporate franchise is so important to Delaware. We're also operating in an increasingly divided and social media-driven society, and that amplifies the difficulties of informing people about a complex area of the law like the corporate franchise. So that's the task that's ahead of us. And I will want to mention briefly also the competition we've been seeing from other states, changing tact here. I think it's important to point out that what SB 21 shows is that Delaware's approach is the middle-of-the-road approach to these problems. Nevada and Texas are our two primary competitors these days, and they have seized on the controversy in Delaware. They have seized on the perceived weakness that the contentious environment has demonstrated, and they did so by taking a different tack. They have quickly proposed a set of very aggressively pro-management, anti-stockholder amendments to their corporation laws. Delaware did not join this race to the bottom. Our approach stands in contrast to the approaches taken by Texas and Nevada as a balanced and middle-of-the-road path, and that is, I think, the right answer, but it is a fact that is often lost in the debate characterizing SB 21 as, for example, a billionaire's bill. So where we are today is that there may in the future be companies that choose to leave Delaware for a more management-friendly jurisdiction. That's okay. But the passage of SB 21 has served, in my view, to restore confidence in Delaware among most of its corporate citizens, the middle-of-the-road companies, and that is very important for Delaware's fiscal health. So that's the good news. But the threat isn't over. As recently as last month, we saw a public announcement by Andreessen Horowitz, one of the leading venture capital firms, that it had chosen to leave Delaware, and it coupled that with a call for startup companies, founders, to avoid incorporating in Delaware. This is a threat to the future of our franchise. There are currently challenges to the constitutionality of SB 21, And what we are hearing from our clients and otherwise is that corporate America is listening and waiting to see whether SB 21 survives before making final decisions about putting on ice any plans to reincorporate. Many of our brave legislators who supported SB 21 will be facing primary challenges, funded in large part by out-of-state special interest groups who opposed SB 21. And as a result, we're all out, as I am today, talking to people and trying to explain the importance of our franchise, not just here in Delaware, but around the country and around the world. I'm going to Taiwan later this month to do that, in fact. So I want to end, I think my time is good, with a couple of quick comments on the lessons that we learned. The corporate franchise is stable, but it is more fragile than we previously believed. In the fractured political environment nationwide and the echo chambers of social media, it's way too easy for a critic, one or two or a small number, to spread their views widely, whether their criticisms are well-founded or not, and it is very difficult to counter those attacks when the answer is as complex as corporate law inherently is. Our legislative process, the close relationships that we have with our legislators are a good thing, but our legislative process is also very vulnerable to special interests. We don't have a tradition of big money contests in our statewide elections or our local elections. And that makes it easy for people to sow disinformation and sway an election. The 2/3 majority requirement under our Constitution is a benefit to us, but it also means that every seat matters. The margins are razor thin, and the election of even a few legislators who are beholden to a special interest donor or who just don't get it could put the continued vitality that supports our franchise at risk. We've also learned that there is competition from states like Nevada and Texas, and they are poised to act quickly to exploit any perceived weakness. Corporations, inertia and traditions of being Delaware corporations are not enough to keep them in Delaware if there is an alternative that better suits their needs in the current economy. So we need to monitor what's going on in other states, and we need to be prepared to respond quickly, but not unwisely, to those threats. And then finally, as I said, our legislators, and more importantly, our citizens and business leaders, may not fully understand the benefits of the corporate franchise to Delaware's economy. And I think we all should do our part to educate public officials, as well as our friends and neighbors, of the importance of the franchise. So that's why I'm here today. And I've been told I have at least, well, I have a couple of minutes for questions, but I will also stay after if no one has a question right now. Oh God, so many questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation.
Thanks.
I am a semi-retired attorney. I have a very deep interest in Delaware and its maintenance as a dominant corporate domicile. Could you simply summarize for the audience here the basis of the constitutional argument against SB 21?
Can I do that succinctly? So, Delaware is unique. The reason we have the Court of Chancery is because there is a provision in our Constitution that ensures that we continue to have a court of equity. We unlike any other, or I guess there are a couple of others, but unlike most other jurisdictions, the equitable powers of our judiciary reside with the Court of Chancery. The legal powers, which is typically awarding damages, remedies for breaches of duty, resides in our Superior Court. The basis of the constitutional challenge, which I think is misguided, is that SB 21, by providing a safe harbor, a means by which corporate fiduciaries can show that they have adopted a good process to fulfill their obligations, that meeting that safe harbor will, in fact, provide safety. And the argument is that under the Constitution, the argument as I understand it, the proponents say that doing so in some way eliminates the Court of Chancery's jurisdiction over a class of disputes in a way that is inconsistent with our Constitution. I think that is wrong for a number of reasons that I won't go into here, except that traditionally there has been a sharing of power between the courts and the legislature. It is not unusual for the legislature to adopt provisions in the Delaware General Corporation Law that in some way inform and restrict the court's ability to disagree with decisions made by corporate directors. And this is of a piece with that type of incremental change. But that is before our Supreme Court as we speak. And I very much hope that the Supreme Court comes to the right conclusion for all of our sakes.
I'm very interested in the leverage or influence of very large asset managers relative to the issues you're discussing, notably Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street, but others who are fiduciaries for people in this room and others. So were any of these large asset managers involved at all in the discussions on SB 21? And are they involved in what is going on in Texas and Nevada?
Yes, the large asset managers, the interesting thing about large asset managers, and this is getting a little bit wonky, so I apologize. Much of Delaware's traditional rules about the influence of significant shareholders comes from an age when most investments were owned by retail shareholders. That changed in the 80s, 90s, and beyond with the growth of the large institutional investors. Those large institutional investors have an outsized amount of influence on decisions made by corporate directors. And they are a key part of the analysis. There is less need for judicial intervention after the fact in questioning the decisions made by well-informed, independent board members, because the large shareholders have the ability to stand up and do stand up and express their will through their votes on behalf of all of us as investors in their funds and the like. So yes, they have been involved in the process, but their interests do not always fully align with the interests of shareholders generally or of corporate managers particularly. And Delaware's approach has always been to vest the decision-making authority in the board of a particular corporation, not in the investors.
Peter Holding, first of all, Richard Layton, has done a great deal for our Commonwealth Trust Company. He's been a wonderful advisor to us. We appreciate everything you've done. I have a question on basically, there's the case that brought this about. To me, being in the trust business for many years and working with law firms around the country, one of the things about Delaware's Chancery Court was the best sales point we had about Delaware was the Chancery Court and the consistency of the law and the fact that people came here because they had a large trust, you wanted to have consistency. You knew you're going to get a good decision out of it. Good or bad, you're going to know you usually have a fair shot with the Chancery Court because of their quality. So is the Chancery Court, in your opinion, is the Chancery Court had an adverse, is people looking at the Chancery Court differently because of the result of the case that brought about SB 21?
I would say no. I think what I've tried to convey is that over time there has been an erosion of the support for the Court of Chancery or concerns raised about the Court of Chancery more broadly than any one case. And that is a concern that SB 21 was intended to address, and that the rest of us have been working in the background to address for a very long time. But I'm not standing up here, as I said, people can disagree about whether any particular decision was correct or was not correct. What we as Delawareans need to recognize is that perception, to some extent, is reality. And if we are hearing from leaders in corporate America and elsewhere that they believe litigation has become too expensive, too burdensome, and too unpredictable, we need to take those concerns to heart.
What do you think? We got one more for Krista? All right. I wanted to hear this too, so go ahead.
Okay, I'll be brief. First up, Kathy, thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you to your firm and your legal and the legal community here in Delaware. I can, your remarks are perfect. One, unfortunately, and very sadly, are what once was a apolitical decision-making process with the General Assembly has become quite political and quite toxic. We're hoping that to overcome that, and your work here, as well as the Secretary of State's work, to get the word out about the strength of our state is so critical. And for a long time, I think we've taken it for granted when it really is the jewel of our economy. When I came down to Delaware to become a member of bar 20 years ago, I think it was about right now, I passed that bar. I went to the bar conference that we all have to sit through for a week. And I can't remember which chancellor it was, or vice chancellor, or legal leader that said, all right, those of you sitting here, you have to understand and know. I wrote the 7 C's of Delaware, and he wasn't talking about oceans, he was talking about the 7 C's of our economy, which in 2005 were credit cards, chickens, cars, chemicals, and the Court of Chancery. I think you have seen and you know what's happened to some of those other industries through no fault of our own. But the fact of the matter is, while we're trying to build up other industries from tech to bioscience, etc., we can't lose what is our heart and soul. And since 1792, that Court of Chancery has stood strong, as has the lawyers in the state and the subsequent businesses. So thank you for what you're doing. It clearly is an effort to save and protect our state. And as a legislator, I'm appreciative, because had you not done that this year, when I was sitting among those 12 writing the state's budget, we would have had a much different looking financial plan for this year. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Well said, Krista. I had some things to say, and you probably said it. No, you certainly said it much better than I did. With that, as an expression of our appreciation for your being here today, we are going to donate a book on your behalf with your name on it. We have a big partnership with a number of early education centers here in the community, and one of them will be receiving a book with your name on. So thank you for being here.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. With that, we've got a lot of great meetings coming up, a lot of animal sort of related themes. We're going to learn about oysters next week. I don't know what it's about, but I'm really looking forward to it. And then the Brandywine Zoo. We're off the following week, the last week of August. And then starting in September, for those of you who didn't read the calendar, the first Thursday of September, we will be here on Thursday, but it's going to be at 8 a.m. for breakfast. So don't forget that. With that, if your schedule permits, please stay and enjoy the macaroons and coffee and fellowship. And also there's a community service meeting, so for those who are involved in that, stick around. And with that, until we see each other, take care of yourself, and if you can, someone else too.